This is a video of a canopy bed I made. It's more of a vlog. Started off by taking some bowling alley floor and ripping apart. Quite the process, separating it and then banging out the nails. And then I just cleaned up the faces so the tongue and the grooves, the glue would adhere well between the pieces. And in groups of 3, I made the pillars for the canopy bed. Then I cleaned up 2 faces, 2 adjacent faces, or perpendicular faces, and then I ran it through the planer to square it up and make it a perfect square. I used Bondo to fill a bunch of the gaps. You can see it's pretty hard, but it sands off pretty easy. So I sanded that off with some low grit. Then I cut them to size. The overall height of the bed was pretty important, so it didn't interfere with the windows. The next bit of work involved ripping some hard maple into a bunch of strips. And you can see all the pieces I ended up with. And that's for the stiles and rails of the bed rails, and the footboard, I should say, as well. And the headboard, I guess, too. Next, I did some resawing to get rid of the extra instead of just running it through the planer. And then I squared up all the edges on all those small pieces and long pieces. It was a lot of jointing and planing. I don't have a table saw, so I have to do a bit more work on the jointer and planer. Here I am measuring up the sizes to see exactly what I'm going to need to make it fit. I didn't have to have a specific size for any of these. I just kind of worked with it. I needed the bed length and width, but other than the height of the bed rails and footboard, I wasn't too specific on, so I had some play. Here I was using the domino to put the mortise holes in for the bed rails. I did doubles to reinforce the strength. You can see that's kind of what the side rails will look like. Measuring off the space so that I can figure out where to put those so they're equally spaced, so there's 3 equally spaced sections on the side rails. I didn't have the best workflow. I should have had a different workflow for labeling these so that they could have all worked with any and been interchangeable for the left and the right side of the bed rails. Instead, I ended up doing a lot of extra labeling. I used the wide mortise settings for the style of the side rail. Here I am cutting the dados for the panels to go in. This was pretty tricky, pretty big bit, 5/8 or maybe a 15 mil, something like that, I can't remember. I did a bunch of the glue up. It also required a lot of passes because I didn't want to take too much out, and doing the stops and starts were pretty challenging. I glued up these dominoes on as much as I could so that when I did my final glue up, I had a little more time to play. Here I'm cutting down the panels. Again, I should have been a little more consistent with my design here. I had to label my pieces, but they were pretty close. I think I even, with these, they were just millimeters off. There's a footboard. Man, those dominoes fit tight, and I did a lot of dry fitting on this. Not only a lot of dry fitting, there was a lot of sanding, a lot of stile and rail sanding. So you could see some of those dominoes were actually glued in prior. All the tight fitting mortises I pre-glued. You saw me do some of that earlier. And that just made this process so much easier. It's nice using having the wide setting because you get a little bit of play. And so those were the wide mortise settings, and then those other dominoes were tight. The glue up was pretty challenging, but if you look at the clamps that are on the table there, you can see a little connector in there, and I got this connector so I could turn my 50-inch clamps into clamps that were long enough, and it took a little bit figuring it out how they work and how to set it up, but man, it was great to have those. I had a lot of measuring and marking to do in this. I was a little more consistent once I came along at this point in the project, but I was trying the domino connectors, the knockdown connectors for the first time, which actually were a dream to work with when I was trying to figure out the size and dry fit things. It was awesome being able to take it apart so easy. Here I am plunging in. Yeah, there's instructions. I found them pretty good. I'll definitely have to read them thoroughly before I do it again. But it made the headboard and the rails and the top rails of the canopy bed really just come together so easily. I put 3 holes in, or 3 mortises in each side, and then there's a metal connector that you have to use, and that's the part that comes apart basically. It uses a little Allen key and a screw to tie it in. So there you can see the vertical part and the 2 sides. There's the bed rail, and got my wood tenon. Now those, I have some loose ones that I've sanded down and I keep in a baggie for dry fit purposes. And here I am doing the vertical plunge. This creates the pocket where you can tie or tighten the connectors together. And you can see there's the access point. Unfortunately, they don't make white covers, and I'm going to paint this bed white. They definitely require some strength to get those tightened. There's actually a certain way you have to have the connector aligned because there's a recess for the screw. There's the tenons, and I had that scrap piece. I just banged it away. Oh, screw was in too far. Oh no, I don't know what that was. The metal piece wasn't down right enough. A big challenge to this build was reusing the headboard from a crib. It was in a bit of beaten up shape, and I had to make it fit. So the track saw came in perfectly here. You can see it's not sitting flush, which obviously isn't ideal. And I thought I got all the metal out, but if you saw that spark, yeah, there was a couple screws in there. It was annoying, but anyways, got through it. Had to use the handsaw a bit. I didn't want to damage the track saw anymore, but actually I should say the blade was totally fine. You can see there's a couple little pin nails in there to help keep the pocket for the connectors of the side rails of the previous crib. Didn't even know they were in there, and that's why I dinged them up. But on the other side, I knew they were there, and I punched them out before I threw the track saw on. I took one of the footboards or headboards, they were the same, but I needed to make a dado that was a different size than the dados for the rest of the bed because of the size of the headboard. So I did that a little differently, and because I did it later, it would have been a big pain to set up the router table to do these plunges. So I used the handheld router to just finish it off. Then to connect that board to the crib headboard, I did some dominoes, the smaller ones. Again, this was a very meticulous part of the job, getting these lined up. I mean, it's just pencil marks, but it took a lot of moving stuff around and just making sure I had things aligned properly. Didn't want to invert them because then the holes wouldn't have been in the right spot. And you think, oh, it'd be easy, just draw some lines, but this is when you start to make a mistake on a task like this that's so specific. Next, I filled all the cracks in the post just to make sure the final product looked good. Then I rounded over the edges so that nobody gets cut. For the rails, I needed to be a little crafty with the start and stop points for the roundovers. So you can see as it gets to the end there, that's not rounded over all the way. So I set up some jigs, and I did that with the pillars as well. I have a little homemade flip stop on the router table. And then I've got my stop block down there at the end of the workbench, and I just ran them through with a roundover. I believe I used a 1/4 inch roundover for this. There's the flip stop. Make sure it's in the right spot, and round it over. And I really like the look of the final product having some of the straight edge and then the round over. A little more sanding. There was a lot of sanding. I don't know if I said that already. There was a lot of sanding in this project. And believe it or not, I did spray paint it, but I didn't videotape it. So here's the final bed in place, and we've got some twill on there, and it looked pretty good. Thanks for watching.